United Nations, New York. Delegations from 6 continents arrive for the 15th session, United Nations General Assembly. An historic session. 17 nations, many newly formed states, become members of the World Organization for Peace.
Mr. President, last Saturday, the country which I have the honor to represent, the Federation of Nigeria, became independent and assumed the rights and the responsibilities of a sovereign state. Today, Nigeria has been admitted into the United Nations organization. It is a desire of Nigeria to remain on friendly terms with all nations and to participate actively in the work of the United Nations organization. We do not intend to align ourselves as a matter of routine with any of the power blocks. We are committed to uphold the principles upon which the United Nations organization is founded.
April 1945. As World War II moves toward climax in Europe and the Pacific, delegates from the Allied nations gather in San Francisco, meet in the Opera House to write a charter, an organization of nations for peace. Official representatives of governments, partners in the war against fascism. Delegates from citizens groups seeking the cause of peace among nations. 2,000 people meet for 2 months and a day. Discuss, listen, argue, debate, serious differences, agree on a charter for a United Nations organization. 2 months later, the atomic age begins. Death in Hiroshima and Nagasaki shocks the world, adds the urgency of survival to the need for peace. The Charter of the United Nations, approved by member nations, October 24th, 1945, outlines the structure of the organization. The main organ of the United Nations, the General Assembly, considers all matters within the scope of the Charter. Then 3 councils, the Security Council, to maintain world peace and security, the Economic and Social Council, to promote higher standards of living and respect for human rights, the Trusteeship Council, to supervise the administration of trust territories, the day-to-day administration of the United Nations, performed by the Secretariat, legal disputes between nations, judged by the International Court of Justice. Delegates to the General Assembly gather for the annual session. The hubbub of many languages makes this town hall meeting truly international. delegates stand silent, conscious of the eyes upon them. Weary of the burdens of war, people look to these men to keep the peace. Each year, the General Assembly elects a new president. The delegates vote by secret ballot. Each nation casts one vote. One nation, one vote gives equal weight to the decisions of small nations or large. The General Assembly does not make laws, does not tell you or your government what to do. The General Assembly discusses matters concerned with peace, with making a better life for all people. The discussions, made public, change people's thinking. The way people vote, win nations to its side. The Charter of the United Nations gives the Security Council the job of keeping the peace. They examine quarrels between countries, suggest ways to adjust differences, outline terms for settling arguments peacefully. 11 men from 11 countries form the Security Council. 6 nations elected by the General Assembly. 5 nations permanent members. France, the United Kingdom, the United States, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and China. The Council votes by a show of hands. 7 yes votes carry a decision. But on important matters, the 5 permanent members must agree. The Security Council acts against threats to the peace. In Libya and Tunisia, in Syria and Lebanon, in Greece, Palestine, Kashmir. In Indonesia, a Good Offices Committee helped to end the struggle between the Netherlands and the new Republic of Indonesia. Action by the Security Council in the Middle East cools off conflicts between Israel and her Arab neighbors. A ceasefire moves the quarrel from the battlefield to the green carpeted chambers of the Security Council.
On the unfounded objections raised by Syria against the execution of the Benot Yaakov Canal project under a concession held by the Palestine Electric Corporation.
Words replace guns in quarrels between nations.
It is necessary, sir, to emphasize the real and actual need for objectivity and clarity in the discussion, because we already sense that our opponents are apt and ready to inject into the discussion.
The Trusteeship Council, concerned with the welfare of people governed by other nations, receives reports from the supervising nations, sends missions to observe progress in these areas, hears petitions from their people. An emissary from British Togoland speaks.
Distinguished members of the Trusteeship Council, I have come here as a petitioner representing the chiefs and peoples of Tagomba, Nanumba, Mamprisi, and Gonja, who are within the northern section of Togoland and the United Kingdom Trusteeship. I accepted to come not in order to...
Many countries, once under colonial rule, achieve independence with help from the Trusteeship Council, become member states of the United Nations. The Economic and Social Council concerns itself with removing the causes of war, promotes higher standards of living for all people, universal respect for human rights and freedoms. Here, as at other United Nations meetings, speakers use one of the 5 official languages. Interpreters translate a French speech into English.
Following in this regard, there are a certain number of other factors which must be taken into account. In particular, the date at which the various reports are prepared.
Russian.
Nos parece también
Spanish.
que si fuéramos a postergar la discusión sobre la situación económica y social
Chinese. The Council appoints special commissions on human rights, population problems, the status of women, and worldwide organizations independent of the United Nations, specialized agencies, work closely with the Council. World Bank, International Fund, Food and Agriculture, Labor, Health, Education, Communications, Weather. 39 stories of glass and steel house the Secretariat. 1,000 people work here. People from many countries, responsible now only to the United Nations. 39 floors of equipment and services, recording studios, printing presses, libraries, cafeterias, stenographers, engineers, scientists, health experts. The Secretary General, Chief Administrative Officer, heads the permanent staff of the Secretariat. And everywhere, the mixture of tongues, the multi-nation staff at work.
Dr. Wan, is this the design you have selected?
Yes, it is.
中文叫什么？
奶罩，保护着母亲的奶头的。
哦，是这样。
Is Malcolm Taylor in maybe Rohut? Yeah. Oh, Miss Lane, could you take these two, please?
Yes,
Give me long distance, please. I'd like to place a call to Geneva.
May I have overseas operator 364 to Geneva, Switzerland, please? United Nations, 1235, thank you.
At The Hague, Netherlands, the International Court of Justice of the United Nations decides legal disputes between nations. 15 judges rule on questions of treaties between nations, on legal relations between governments, creating a pattern of international law that people everywhere may live in peace. War, death and ruins, lives uprooted, children hungry and alone. UNICEF, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, established by the General Assembly, carries food, medicine, clothing to needy children everywhere. In countries shattered by war, the strange word UNICEF became familiar to the children. Even today, UNICEF means milk in many languages around the world. Wherever war, disaster, famine strike at children's lives, UNICEF steps in. People reaching out to help. The Turkish government, in a long-term campaign against tuberculosis, called upon WHO, the World Health Organization, for technical help. 4 doctors arrived, blueprinted a model training center, lectured to Turkish doctors on the latest techniques, helped outline a training program for nurses. Within 2 years, an all-Turkish staff operates the training center. In Pakistan, a great dam takes shape, diverts the Indus River to water 3 million acres of farmland. Technical experts from the United Nations work with Pakistani engineers. And experts from FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, test the soil. What crops grow best here? How much water per acre to make the barren land produce again? UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, another independent agency cooperating with the United Nations. Teachers, scientists, experts from all parts of the world work together for peace through education. In Pátzcuaro, Mexico, teachers from Latin American countries attend classes, learn the methods of fundamental education, learning for living. Everywhere, UNESCO finds the thirst for education. People learning to write, people learning to read. Education opening the doors to a better life. In central India, the farmer fights a losing battle against Khan's grass, a tough, deep-rooted weed choking his land. The only answer, deep plowing to kill the roots. The Indian government seeks a loan, asks the World Bank for $10 million to buy 300 tractors. The heavy-duty tractors plow under the Khan's grass, move from farm to farm, turning up the roots to die in the sun. The land produces good crops again. The harvest, a promise of happier times. We, the people of every continent, determined to save our children from the horrors of war, seek freedom from poverty. Freedom to live and work in dignity. And for our children, the children of every continent, we seek the gifts of health, of knowledge, of happiness. We, the peoples of the United Nations, look out upon the world, seeking to understand neighbors from other lands. And in the halls of the United Nations, men work with neighbors from other lands, learning to act with tolerance. Peace growing in the minds of man.